It's time for another low-budget binge. There's a wide variety in this week's bundle, some good, some bad, but all with that low-budget love of the horror genre. Let's start binging. Welcome back to ML Miller Frights. I'm ML Miller. Before we begin, please do me a favor and punch that like button down below. Share this video with all of your social media addicted pals. Click subscribe to this channel and ring that bell for notifications. Low Budget Binge is where we venture down the path less traveled and look at low budget, no budget, and sometimes international films that never get that top billing you see with the usual Hollywood fare. I'll indicate in the review down below where you can find these films along with their trailers. Here we go. Robert Reborn is available streaming on Tubi. It's directed and written by Andrew Jones. This is it, the last, or should I say most recent installment of the Robert series. I can't say I had as much fun with this series as I did with the Bad Ben films, but Andrew Jones' time-spanning story about a murderous living doll with a squished-up face had its moments. Based on a doll that is supposed to be cursed in real life, Robert has tread his murderous path through a family home, then a museum, then went back in time to take on Nazis for 2 films. In Robert Reborn, we find Robert and the Toymaker, played by Lee Bain, in 1951 Russia, with the Toymaker running a stage show featuring moving dolls. He has added 2 more dolls to his collection since Robert's toy companions were killed in the last installment. This time around, he's joined by Miss Cyclops, who has Wolverine-style claws, and Kalashnikov, who brandishes guns for hands. These 2 new dolls are not going for the subtle chills of the last couple installments. Instead, they're more extreme and in your face. They feel like they would be much more at home in the Puppet Master universe than this one. Say what you will about the Robert series, but it has been a bit more subtle than Puppet Master. While that series has gone off the deep end, the Robert series at least felt like some effort was put into the script, and there was a menacing nuance to the simple yet creepy way the dolls moved. That is until Robert Reborn, which seems to want to brandish itself as not your pappy's Robert movie. In almost every way, the film feels rushed and cheaply put together. It also attempts to bring humor and self-referentialism into the mix, which sadly doesn't work as much as the filmmaker wants it to. This time around, instead of fighting Nazis on a train, the Toymaker and the dolls battle KGB agents on a plane. The film doesn't plot along, omitting the doll action until the second half, which they did in the previous 2 films. Instead, Robert shows up at about the 20-minute mark. There's also an opening segment that clues us in as to who or what Robert is, a question I queried while writing my review of the last film. It only took 5 films to get a bit of character for the little guy. So 2 of my main criticisms from the last 2 films felt addressed and corrected in Robert Reborn. Still, this final installment isn't a good movie. It's only for the Robert completists out there, if there are any. I can't say I've had a great time with this series, but it had its moments. The doll itself and the real story is actually quite chilling, but it still vexes me as to why they chose to switch up the face and replace it with a Willem Dafoe mock-up. While I give the filmmaker Andrew Jones credit for sticking around for 5 movies, the well went dry by about the 3rd one. Looking back, the first 3 were actually well made and decently written, though derivative of better films. If there is another Robert movie, I'll cover it, but it looks like the filmmaker has moved on to other projects, so maybe Robert can finally be at rest. American Werewolves documentary is new on-demand and digital download from Small Town Monsters and 1091 Pictures. It's directed by Seth Breedlove. Small Town Monsters and director Seth Breedlove shifts the focus from UFOs and Bigfoots to dogmen in this new installment in their ongoing documentary series. This documentary interviews eyewitnesses to strange, hairy, dog-like creatures that stand on their hind legs. It's a cryptid I don't necessarily believe in as much as I do UFOs and Bigfoot, but from the testimonies, it seems like the people at least believe in what they're saying. The documentary focuses on 2 locations, Bucyrus, Ohio, and the land between the lakes in Kentucky. Screen time is given to much of the heavily wooded landscapes in each locale. Coming from Ohio myself, I can't say I ever have seen a dogman, though I have relatives who swear they saw a black panther on their property when I was a kid. so I've had some experience hearing stories about cryptids from an early age. The documentary points out how much of these dogmen seem to have ties to Native American culture, with some of the sightings occurring near burial mounds. I found this quite interesting. Like Mulder, I want to believe in this stuff, but it's hard to do so with dogmen. Hearing these down-home people use the same cryptid buzzwords like bipedal and canine makes me suspicious that they might be indulging on some of the tales in order to appear in a documentary. The multiple stories that pair the dogmen with strange lights in the sky, and even cameo appearances by Sasquatch, make it seem like these witnesses are trying to build their own kind of MCU-connected continuity with these stories. As usual, Small Town Monsters puts together a thorough and slick-looking documentary with plenty of scenes moodily lit depicting a man in a pretty decent werewolf suit trying to give you something wolfy to look at while listening to these stories. Everything is taken seriously, and much info about the werewolf in various cultures is touched upon. This is definitely a good introduction to the Dogman cryptology. Personally, I've already wasted hours on YouTube watching accounts of this monster. I go to sleep listening to a lot of the various cryptid stories narrated on sites like Bigfoot Case Files, Shrouded Hand, Lazy Masquerade, and Beyond Creepy. So while this doc didn't really teach me anything new, it did compile a lot of the info I've gleaned from many videos out there on the subject. Row 19, aka Ryad 19, is new on DVD and Blu-ray from Welgo USA. It's directed by Alexander Babaev and written by James Rabb. Katrina, played by Svetlana Ivanova, and her daughter Diana, played by Marta Kessler, take their seats on a night flight with very few passengers. This is a special flight, as it is the first flight Katrina has taken since she was a young girl, when she was the sole survivor of a devastating plane crash. As soon as they take off, the flight begins experiencing difficulties and passengers begin biting the dust one by one. Cursed with visions of dark hands grabbing her in ghostly flashbacks to the earlier crash, Katrina fights for her life and the life of her child on a plane that has some very strange phenomena going on. Reminiscent of another Russian airplane thriller called Blood Red Sky, which premiered on Netflix last year and I reviewed a while back, Row 19 tells another supernatural tale in the not-so-friendly skies. While Blood Red Sky was more of a thrill-a-minute action horror, Row 19 drives more into the realm of suspense, mystery, and a strong handling of aerophobia, or the fear of flying. The opening moments are quite strong, depicting the final horrifying moments of Katerina's original flight, where she lost her mom and turned out to be the sole survivor. The scene also amps the mystery as it introduces a witch-like woman chanting in the seat behind young Katerina, filling the little gal with even more fear. After a montage and a few news reports detailing that it's 20 years later, the film dives right back into the plane and begins the strange happenings once again. While most likely this was meant to save money on sets, using the airplane interiors for the main stage for all of the drama to play out, it also amps the claustrophobia of being trapped in a small space and being out of control. It's the constant barrage of noise, action, and mystery that really makes for a highly stressful movie to sit through. Row 19 has the kind of Twilight Zone feel. There's something the film is not telling the viewer, and it's up to the viewer to figure out just what it is. For the most part, Row 19 handles the mystery well. There are a lot of seemingly random events occurring, some of them weird as hell, such as a woman talking to her dead husband in the back of the plane, and some are just plain banal action like a man constantly scribbling in his notebook. The frantic way this is edited, paired with the somewhat manic way the adult Katrina is acting, who is sensibly nervous about the flight and protective of her daughter, really does its job on the nerves. Most films reminiscent of a Twilight Zone episode suffer from feeling like an overly extended episode, kind of like that season when the Twilight Zone series was lengthened to an hour. Row 19 suffers from this sag in the middle as well. By the time the climax came around, the mystery lost momentum, especially since it's quite easy to figure out what happened by the end of the first hour. The final moments are quite shocking and play out nightmarishly, despite the overlong time it took to get there. I don't want to oversell Row 19. The dubbed version I watched is pretty badly produced, and some of the lines simply don't ring the same, literally translated in the way they show up. It cuts into the drama quite a bit. Some of the acting isn't great, but that is mostly due to the story, which really gives some of the characters some odd and socially awkward things to do. Again, this might be because of the translation from Russian to English. While there are some solid thrills and chills with black hands grabbing at Katrina and her daughter, a milky-eyed witch, and some strange deaths, I found Row 19 to be occasionally effective, but mostly uncomfortable and simply strangely put together. Kind of the same way I feel about airplane travel. It definitely handles the phobias well, but the film as a whole is a rough trip indeed. A.K. Tolstoy's A Taste of Blood, aka Sangra Verdulak, is new on-demand and digital download from Cleopatra Entertainment. It's directed by Santiago Fernandez Calvete and written by Santiago Fernandez Calvete from a novel by Alexei Tolstoy. A Taste of Blood begins with a young gal named Natalia, played by Alfonsina Carroccio, and her boyfriend Aguirre, played by Germain Palacios, arriving at a simple house in Argentina. She is met by her father, who scolds the girl to come inside quickly, as there seems to be a vampire infestation in the surrounding woods. But after spending the night, the couple leave only to find themselves drawn back to the father's home after tangling with a vampire. The rest of the film plays out as the viewer and the vampire-hunting father are forced to guess who is the vampire in the house among the family members. A Taste of Blood has set the stage for some wonderfully dank and dismal scenes of vampire action in a misty and dark forest. There are numerous scenes of high tension and peril as the two youngsters throw caution to the wind and would rather be together than be safe. I think there's an interesting tale of how far a family's obsession can go before it breaks in A Taste of Blood, but I don't know if it communicates that in the clearest of ways. One of the reasons I was left scratching my head was the choice to have the younger kids speak English while the rest of the cast speak Spanish. It's not that the use of two languages confused me, it's that the father would say something in Spanish, and then Natalia would respond in English, and instead of responding back in English, the father stuck with the Spanish. I was kind of like, just pick a language and stick with it. But unfortunately, no one listens to me, and the entire film is dialogued in that manner. On top of that, I was a little hazy as to what era and age this film was taking place in. It seems like it wants to tell a story set in a primitive time with old world customs, yet the soundtrack is littered with modern dance and house music. Just when I was getting a Hammer Films vibe as the vamps stalk the family in the woods, a driving bass rings out that felt completely out of place. There just seemed to be too many elements of strangeness for me to get completely into A Taste of Blood. It does a lot right. The vamps are truly scary, depicted as animalistic monsters with sores on their mouths. They look infectious, gross, and dangerous. I also like the mystery aspect of who is actually afflicted with vampirism. It made me not trust anyone in the movie. But at the same time, simple things like language and tone gives the film an uneasy vibe that makes it hard to completely understand. A Taste of Blood turned out to be a mixed bag. If you're a vampire completist, I think you'll find enough to like, but A Taste of Blood feels a bit all over the place for my tastes. Story Game is new on demand and digital download and exclusively streaming on Screambox from Cinedigm. It's directed and written by Jason K. Lau. A trio of art schoolers save their pennies and decide to go camping on a beach in Hawaii. Though the groundskeeper warns them, they decide to camp anyway and tell each other a trio of ghost stories around a campfire using an app a friend of theirs developed. The story game offers up a setting, a genre, and an X factor, and in this particular game, it has the group formulate a supernatural story set in Japan about someone with green eyes. Wrangling in the groundskeeper as the judge, the three each tell a tale of terror in hopes to win the game, but the groundskeeper has his own story to tell. Story Game is an anthology, all written and directed by Jason K. Lau. While some of the tales are better than others, I was impressed at the level of production and acting Lau was able to put together for this film. Each story has a different tone and feel to it. And while some left me wanting, the entire package is an impressively polished one. Here's what I thought of each of the stories in Story Game. Story 1 is about a new girl in town who becomes the subject of bullying by the popular gals in school. When the prank goes too far, she exhibits dark power that none of them knew she possessed. This is the weakest of the bunch for me. It's a little too much like Carrie, with a girl with powers being bullied by her classmates, and the power itself is poorly explained. Even the bullying that the lead endures isn't that horrible. Out of all the stories of the bunch, this was by far the weakest. Story 2 tells the legend of the split-faced girl who enchants men to believe she is beautiful when her mask hides something monstrous underneath. I kind of like this urban legend as it delved into obsession and desire quite elegantly. The acting is above par on this one. mainly because the actors are older and the visage of the cursed girl with the scarred face hidden by a face mask felt timely, as well as mysterious and foreboding. Who knows what people are hiding behind their masks these days? This one dares to peek underneath, and it's a good one. Story 3 takes place in feudal Japan, the time of the samurai. A young maid falls in love with her master, but when his jealous wife finds out, it means death for more than one of the people involved. This was an incredibly rich story for how short it was. There's a fun drunken master homage fight scene, as well as some cool ghostly action. There are even some strange and twisted masks that are downright chilling to look at. I was impressed at how much range Lau got with this story and how powerful it ended. They saved the best one for last in this one, for sure. But the stories aren't over when the groundskeeper has a tale to tell of his own. His last story is best left experienced with no prep. It's a fun sci-fi horror mix, and it proves my point that a story with different limitations and guidelines makes the whole thing feel a lot fresher. I feel the setting of Japan kind of limits Story Game from having as much variety as most anthologies. That said, Lau gets his money's worth traveling into the past and the present, as well as covering stories set in high school everyday life and in feudal Japan. He made the most of it, and I guess this makes for much franchise potential with a whole new set of guidelines for a story game set in a new exotic locale for the next one. But I think I would have liked an anthology which had each storyteller been given their own unique parameters to the tale. That said, this is a top-tier looking film with solid acting throughout. The gore is limited, doesn't go over the top or excessive, but there are some potent and poignant scares along the way. Only one of these stories let me down. That's a pretty strong showing. Story Game celebrates the art of storytelling and provides a few quality thrills and chills along the way. I definitely recommend it for those who like their anthologies on the exotic side. Finally, we have The Prey, Legend of Carnoctis. It's new on demand and digital download. It's directed by Sire Hensman and Matthew Hensman, and written by Matthew Hensman and Gustavo Saenz de la Peña. A group of mercenaries led by Chronicles of Riddick's Nick Chinland, Underworld's Kevin Grievous, and Danny Trejo, who is in every other movie you've probably seen, steal a cache of gold in Afghanistan and hide it in a desert cave in order to come back and pick it up with the helicopter later. At the same time, an army unit find themselves taking shelter in the same cave from enemy fire. Also in this cave is a man-eating monster of legend called the Carnoctis. When all three parties meet, bullets, knives, teeth, claws, and fur begin to fly. The Prey, Legend of Carnoctis, is a perfect Saturday afternoon time waster. It's got a lot of flashy action, a tough guy cast, macho dialogue, a big monster, and a location that is claustrophobic and atmospheric. At its best, it's a low-rent Predator meets The Expendables, with less grit and star power, but a lot of the same story beats. This isn't a rip on the film, it's a tried-and-true concept, and filmmakers Sire and Matthew Hensman do a decent job of aping it. I was never bored with The Prey. I think I might have rolled my eyes at some of the over-the-top macho dialogue, but still, it does its job of being a non-stop thrill fest with a big enough cast to highlight a gnarly death at the hands of the monster every few minutes or so. The Prey also does a good job of filling in the blanks that are obviously above the film's pay grade. Incorporating comic book panels, the Hensmans whittle together a fun origin and backstory during the credits sequence, so the viewer is tossed right into the middle of the action from minute one. It would have been interesting to see how far the filmmakers could have pushed this concept, but what shows up is a fun and clever way to cut corners budget-wise. This one even offers up a cool behind-the-scenes sketches, creature designs, and storyboards playing during the end credits. The monster is obviously a man in a suit. It's sort of like a Bigfoot, but it appears to have multiple eyes and a long tail, so it's not your standard Sasquatchonian. It seems there has been a lot of work in the design of the beast, and the end result is impressive, and the Hensman seems to have fun with it, having it leap out of the darkness and kill folks. There is a comic booky concept of a nerve gas which makes everyone who breathes it in see visions of their heart's desire. Sure, this is oddball, but somehow it fits and makes for yet another challenge for these soldiers and mercenaries to tackle. It also provides some nice moments that distinguish the characters of one soldier to the next. So if you're looking for some macho overload, man-on-monster military action, The Prey, Legend of Carnoctis delivers capably. Even though he's featured prominently on the poster, there isn't enough Danny Trejo in this one, but he may be around for a sequel if it is ever made. Kevin Grievous is always good and needs to be in more horror movies. Everything from his voice to his presence is monstrous itself. The rest of the cast is decent, and I really like Nick Chinland, who plays this role kind of like Carl Urban does with Butcher in The Boys. The Prey, Legend of Carnoctus is a rowdy creature feature that will feel refreshing for those who miss that kind of old-school fun.
You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be, stuck inside your reality. You're doomed. Oh, you're doomed. You're doomed. You're doomed. Live the life that you are meant to be. Live inside that reality.